Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Foresight Radio Podcast, where we speak with industry leaders and innovators who are taking steps to make the senior living industry better. Our goal is to disrupt the industry and leave it better than we found it. Now on with the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Foresight Radio Podcast. I am your host, Rachel Hill, Creative Director here at Senior Living Foresight. And I have a fantastic guest with me today. Today, I am joined by Tara Jenkins of Harmony in Dementia, and I am beyond thrilled to dive into this conversation. We're going to be talking about how she got into music, the pivot into senior living, which I find really interesting. I'm excited to hear about because I love this idea of outside of the box careers in senior living, because I feel like I really have one being on the creative side. And we're also going to talk about the mental health aspect and really reducing that isolation that our residents and older adults can feel in the senior living space. So Tara, hello and welcome to the show.
Hello, it is great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I can't thank you enough for joining me. I have so been looking forward to this conversation. We had a delay a little bit. I was traveling. You're busy. So I am thrilled to finally have you here and talk all things music and the wonderful work that you're doing. So let's back up a little bit here. So I want to talk, you're in Texas-based company, which I am thrilled. Obviously, great music in Texas, but I want to hear a little bit about you and how you got started in music, and then we'll dive in a little bit to that pivot to senior living, but I would love to hear about your musical background, please.
Sure. So I grew up always loving music. I was in the choir and the band, and I did theater, all the things in high school and that sort of a thing. And when it came time for college, I knew I wanted to do music, but I knew I didn't want to teach. I didn't have, that personality for performance. I didn't want to go that route. And so that's kind of how I stumbled upon music therapy. I just started researching music careers. So for me, it was more like just searching what's out there. And so I came upon music therapy, and it sounded really interesting, and it really piqued my interest and my love of music and working with people. And so that's kind of how I started. And, I went to schools and, did all the things. And then my first semester, I realized, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. So I was very fortunate. That I just I didn't happen upon it because I did my homework, but then once I was in it, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. And my first practicum was with older adults, and I immediately connected with that group of people. So, to talk about music therapy, essentially what we do is we're clinical and evidence-based practice. So we use music to accomplish individualized goals. And I always say, anywhere a nurse can work, we can work. So it's a really good way to think of it.
Yes.
We work with all populations, all age groups, and all ages and stages of life. So that's like my little my elevator speech, so to speak. If someone's like, "What is music therapy?" But we do have 4 years of coursework. We move forward with a 6-month internship, and so for me, that was in older adults. I was in long-term care for 6 months with, my practicum or my internship supervisor. And then I was under the activities director in the nursing home. So I kind of worked very closely with her and did group and individual work for 6 months. And then we sit for a national board exam. So there's a lot.
You are jumping through some hoops.
Yeah.
I love it. I want to pause this here for a second because what I'm so impressed by is the extensive amount of work that goes into getting a degree in this and really mastering this. You're blowing my mind here because, we would generally think like, oh, okay, well, you're teaching music. Not that that's an easy feat, but it's like, oh, okay, we're going to just go in there, we're gonna play the piano and sing along, and you are like, no, let's back up. this is intensive. So that's amazing. The
Yeah.
dedication you have, and that anyone in this field has. I love hearing that.
We get the credential MTBC, which is music therapist board certified.
Beautiful.
And so if anyone out there is wanting to find a music therapist, you can go to cbmt.org. It's Certification Board of Music Therapists. Okay. And there should be a spot there to search for music therapist. So that's just like a little tidbit if anyone, wants to work with a music therapist or wants to learn more, that sort of a thing.
I love that, especially because like I was saying in your intro, I love this idea of opening up the career path in senior living to millennials and Gen Zs. And I always, I tread lightly because I don't want it to sound ageist. Anyone can jump in and do this. I'm not saying you have to be a certain age, but what gets me really excited is building a foundation and a future for the industry. So I really appreciate you sharing kind of the way to drill down and really learn more about that, because I think there's just so many opportunities to work in senior living and in the space in these sort of really creative or outside the box ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of how my career started. So after I graduated college, at that time, music therapists in senior living as like a full-time position was not very common. And honestly, it still isn't. Not every senior living has one, but now there are job postings for it, right? There's more opportunity out there for us on a full-time basis with companies, but that wasn't always the case. A lot of times it's contract, and that's a lot of what I do in private practice. But I've been working in senior living for 15 years. And so as soon as I got out of college, and I started as an activities assistant. So I was hired and as an activities assistant, and eventually stepped into the role as activities director. And so I did some music therapy work, but then I also, I'm wearing the hat of activities director. And as you know, you're doing a million things at once.
Yes. Talk to me about that balance, because I'm assuming while you're in this role, you want to bring value and add these interesting activities and programming. And I'm sure obviously you wanted a lot of it to be music based and have fun, but that struggle, right? Of wanting to be creative, but also having to kind of walk the state line and do these different things. I'd love to hear about your journey.
I will say, I was very fortunate that, I know for a lot of activity directors, obviously budget is always the big one, especially after the pandemic. This was long before the pandemic. So this was early in my career. And I was fortunate that I was at a community that recognized the importance. It was Life Enrichment was our department.
Yes.
But it was a company that recognized it and supported it. So we did have a healthy budget, but I oversaw memory care, assisted living, and kind of early stage. So kind of the in between. So there were kind of 3 levels of care that I oversaw. And I think having a strong team, especially if you're creative, is really important, because I could rely on my activities assistants. Hey, you're going to lead these groups, so I can go to the meetings, go to like family updates, things like that. But then also schedule in time so I could do some music. So it would be like maybe one group a week on each floor. So I would block out time and I would say, okay, it would all be the same day or be different days. It would depend on the schedule, but I would pick once a week or twice a month or whatever, I could allow, so I could still be doing that. And that's kind of what eventually when I left, is because I realized I wanted to do it full time. I realized, that's what I went to school for. That's what I was passionate about. And I was fortunate. I found a company that was starting a music therapy position. It was long-term care and kind of like all stages. So again, assisted living through end of life. And so I started a music therapy program at that community. So it was just me doing individual and group services full time, and it was wonderful. It wasn't the right fit. And I was getting frustrated, and the residents are never the issue, right? Everywhere I went, the hardest thing to do was to leave the residents. Loved the residents, loved the work I was doing, but it was more like what was fulfilling for me. And so I started private practice, and this was in the DC area. Okay. So I started private practice, and then it was primarily contract work, working with individuals and groups for music therapy with older adults and all stages. So from healthy and well through end of life. So including assisted living and memory care. And then, my husband and I relocated to Austin. So that's where I am now. We've been here about 6 years.
Awesome.
And I was working originally for a company for a while, doing great work. And again, that calling of kind of wanting to do more. And for me, wanting to really support caregivers and care partners. It's a real passion of mine and always has been. And so that's kind of when I decided, okay, I'm going to go back into private practice. It's where I'm comfortable. It's what I really enjoy. And it allows me to explore other areas. So, the other company was supportive, but again, what's nice about being in your own practice is you're making the decisions every which way you go. And so for me, I found that was helpful along the way.
I love that. I mean, what a journey. I mean, imagine that's not easy. Those are difficult decisions to make, and diving in and, starting your own business. That's never easy. I always just have such a huge appreciation for someone that takes that entrepreneurial spirit because they're so passionate about something. It's never about money. It's always about what God.
Look, and I don't mean that rudely, but
I think your sentiments are clearly understood across the board in this industry. Absolutely. Yeah. No one in senior living. My mom was a caregiver in a nursing home for 2 decades.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. She clearly did not do it for the money. And that's the point though. And that's why we need people like you in this field, because it's about being passionate and doing good. So I want to talk a little bit about really what this programming looks like. One of my favorite things that I saw when I was going learning about your company and kind of going over everything you do is this concept of customization, because one of my big pet peeves with any product in any industry, nothing is one size fits all. Absolutely.
Oh, no, exactly.
Unless it's a Snuggie, then all right, then fair. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm down with that. So what I love is that you have this customization for these music programs. So if we can back up a little bit, I want to kind of talk about, you talk about different stages of older adults that you work with. And I'm assuming that greatly obviously impacts the programming. So can we talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, very much so. So, a lot of my goal areas, and this is more broad, and then I'll get more specific with each group. But, I'm always trying to provide opportunities for meaningful connections. So doing a lot of reminiscence, a lot of creative expression. I want to increase socialization. So that can be with their peers, with family, with friends, with care staff. One thing that's really big whenever I'm in a group setting is I always encourage care staff to be a part of the group, even if they're just walking by. Sometimes it's the director of nursing and they're singing or dancing as they're walking by, and I'll give them a shout out because it makes a positive connection with that individual living with dementia. And a lot of times when they see nursing staff, especially towards, memory care and later stages, the emotional and that association is, oh, they're here to do something I don't like. They're here to give me a bath. They're here to do care. They're here to do the hard stuff. So how can we make a positive relationship? So if that same care staff is now in my music therapy group and they see that Sue loves, why am I blanking on a song? I don't know. You'd think, but Sue loves Hey Good Looking. There's one. Sue loves Hank Williams and she loves Hey Good Looking. Then maybe when I'm doing care with Sue, maybe I'll put that on. Or maybe if I'm comfortable singing, and then you're building this relationship in a different way. And now they have a positive association with Sue has a positive association with that care staff. So that's something I always try to focus on, in my group work, and individual work as well. But group work, a lot of times it's easier to try to encourage folks. And again, since I worked full time in senior living, I know what schedules are like. I know, when the music therapist is there, maybe that's time for folks to get other work done. And I get that. But there is an importance to engage with those residents. while that programming's going on, because that's building rapport and it's building those positive relationships. So then when you get into a tough spot or someone's having a challenging day or a challenging moment in their day, you can then pull out those tools from the toolbox, right? And so, even though not everyone is trained as a music therapist, they can still utilize some of the tools that I'm sharing in a group with folks later on. So that's something else I love to focus on as well.
Absolutely.
Also increasing communication and self-expression. Those are big ones for me. And then decreasing isolation, stress, and agitation. And so that's another big area. So, when I work with any group, it's all about getting to know them, getting to know their preferences. And so a lot of times I do kind of a one group where I go in, and a lot of times I'll use traditional and contemporary folk music. I don't always start with that as a first session, but for me, I've found, especially in the area I'm in, that's music that a lot of people connect with. And so that is a good starting point for me. But if, you were working with an individual, a lot of times someone who's living with dementia, songs from their late teens, early 20s are going to be songs that stick with them the most. So, if you know how old they are and then do the math, if you don't know their musical preferences, if they maybe cannot communicate that to you, that's always a good starting point. And then I always say, become a detective. And that's what I love about my job is, trying to figure out, okay, so Mary is tapping her toes to big band music, but I'm finding she does not care for rock and roll. So, now in an individual setting, that's how I can really customize it, is I can get down to the specific song. I can get down to the specific genre, the decade, performer. Maybe they love Elvis, right? So I can really hone in on it. In a group setting, it's a little different because I want to make sure everybody's preferences are represented. And a lot of times I don't always know who's going to show up at the group. I may have regulars, but you never know who's going to be coming in and out. And so I try to make sure I've got music from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, now going into 80s. I'm trying to, and 40s is fading, but is not completely gone. Right. Because that's the other thing, this is something I could talk about for forever, but when it comes to music preferences, there's so many influences, right? So Absolutely. We talk about the music that is important to us when we're younger, but sometimes we also enjoy the music that was played for us. So you may have folks who are more rock and roll, they're more 50s and 60s. That's like where they live. That's where they grew up. That's the music of their generation. But their parents maybe listen to the 30s and 40s music. And so they may still connect with that when they're older. And so that's something for me that I always want to kind of like push that envelope, is I want to stay with what they're comfortable with, but then I'm also wanting to explore new music as well. So I love bringing in songs, we're in the autumn time of year. One song I love is Harvest Moon by Neil Young. And it's a song that I found either people love it because they are a Neil Young fan or they've never heard it. So that's another thing I always like to say too, is, you can still teach new songs, you can still share new music and create new connections to music as well. So starting with the familiar is hands down the best way to start with familiar music when working with folks, but then go and explore and kind of see what's out there. And so no matter who I'm working with, that's what I'm constantly doing, song by song. I'm a lot is going on at once. I'm looking at everybody. How are they interacting? Is this working? Do I need to change, what I'm doing? Yes. And for a group setting, I also bring in lots of instruments. So I've got drums, handheld percussion, handbells, all different things. And so again, it's another way when you think of our senses, you want to engage folks with as many senses as possible. And, you're trying all these different methods and maybe you're just getting a finger tap back. And that's amazing for that person. Or maybe someone is standing up and dancing and encouraging everybody else to dance in, So both of those are amazing moments for those individuals for different reasons. So
Yeah.
again, the cognitive piece is reminiscence, sharing those memories associated with the music, sharing, sometimes, you might play a song and that was the song that was played at their wedding, or that was a song that their mother sang to them, that sort of a thing. Sometimes, too, I'm encouraging tactile. So that's when the instruments really come into play. So having that
Hmm.
tactile sense, visual and auditory is kind of throughout the whole session, because I'm
Absolutely.
giving a lot of visual and auditory input, but then I'm also providing, I like to do pictures too. So I
Okay.
might bring, if we're talking about Elvis, maybe I'll show him when he's just starting in Jailhouse Rock. And then maybe when he's doing his concerts in Hawaii, where he's got, the outfit everybody
The
knows.
full get up.
Yes.
Yes.
So I know I'm kind of jumping all around, but there's so much that goes into any one group, right? That goes into any session that I work with folks. And with independent living, it's more focused on music wellness. So a lot of times that's where our focus is, or it might be more of a music history based. They might want more facts, more history, that sort of a thing. When it's assisted living and memory care, the music wellness piece is there, but also just providing those opportunities for socialization, for communication. And for me, choice is another big one. There's so many things, you hear so many folks when they're living with dementia and they're aware, when they're in that awareness period, the loss of independence is huge. There's so many things that are either being taken away or that they can no longer do, or that folks may feel, well, it's not safe for you to do this, that sort of a thing. So how in my group can I promote independence? And so that's as simple as giving two choices of an instrument. Do you want to try the drum, or do you want to try a maraca? And if they say no to both, I'm going to say that's fine,
Mhm.
because again, that's still a choice. They're still making a choice, and they're making a choice to be there. And that's another thing that's kind of a pet peeve of mine that goes back to an activity director, but having the choice to join an activity is a big one
Yes.
for me, especially folks who are in wheelchairs. And a lot of times people, they mean well. It's not like they're doing it on
Yeah.
purpose, but they'll wheel someone into an activity and they'll kind of just drop them off, but they've never asked them if they want to be there, And so having that choice as well. And I found, if I have an individual who maybe they love music, but today's not the day for it, I allow them to leave, and a lot of times they'll come back along the way. So giving them that opportunity, that choice, letting their voice be heard, I think is really important. And so I try to focus that in on my work as well.
Well, I mean, it's powerful, right? Like I think one of the
Yeah.
biggest lessons I've learned from, my past 2 years of sort of being involved in the industry is I think a lot about myself now. Like, I'm under 40, and I think about the things I like to do, the decisions I make, how
Hmm.
I communicate that. And the biggest thing I'm learning is I by no means want that taken away from me as I age.
Exactly.
That is
Yeah.
hugely important. Like, my husband and I have very different taste in movies. So it's like,
Hmm.
no, I'm not gonna go see this sci-fi nonsense. Like,
Yeah.
we can only watch it if it's streaming, and I'll probably do something else in the background. That sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, yeah, I don't want that taken away from me. So I think that's really powerful. And I mean, I also really kind of want to unpack, you talked about so much here. And one of the
I
things
know. I'm so I can
no,
I'm very passionate if you
listen,
can't tell.
I love everything about it. And I think one of my standout things that you said is this idea of creating a sensory experience with music, because I think a lot about very much ties in with obviously like food, right? Like, and how
Hmm.
you can go right back to where you were at the table from a meal from your mom or your dad.
Yeah.
And I feel the exact same way about music. Like, I very much love Motown, I
Mm-hmm.
grew up on Motown. My dad was a big fan, and then I'm immediately like, oh my gosh, our big old record player that had huge speakers, and I just think that's such a beautiful way to sort of take someone back to a really special moment. And I'm just curious if obviously you don't have to name anyone or the community, but just curious if you have
Mm-hmm.
any stories to kind of share
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So I have one song that I was sharing. It was the Everly Brothers, All I Have to Do Is Dream. And, I had someone, this was assisted living, and I had a gentleman who started crying during it. And so whenever someone becomes tearful, I always try to keep the group going, but go over to that person. I always hand them a tissue, because I'm singing and I'm leading the group. So I can't do a lot of verbal processing. And of course, if you're in memory care, you want to do less verbal processing because they may not always be able to communicate in that way. But in this
Mhm.
case, I could ask the individual. I asked if it was okay to keep sharing the song. He said yes. I gave him a tissue. We continued to share the song. Again, this is where my music therapy training comes in. And, at the end, we were able to process it as a group. He was with people he was comfortable with. It was a small assisted living group. They were, I hate the term high and low functioning, but, they were on the higher end of still being very independent,
Mhm.
still being able to do a lot. And he said, this song made me tearful because it made me think about my wife, and she currently is living with dementia. She's in this community. They have a dementia community within the assisted living. And so he's
Yeah.
like, I go and visit her, and she doesn't always recognize me. She doesn't always see me. But this song is bringing me back to, times we had when we were younger in our early years. But then it's also bringing me back to, I do go and visit her and share this song. And sometimes she's able to smile or sing along or, yeah. So that, in that moment, there's a lot for me as a music therapist. I want to make sure that that individual is safe. Another thing I always stress is my groups are a safe space. And I always
Mhm.
try to let folks know that you can share as much or as little as you want. And I always say there's no wrong way to feel when it comes to music, because I think a lot of times we're told along the way, or there's assumptions along the way that like music should be happy, like music should make us happy. And I have plenty of stories of, happy moments with music, but I like sharing a story like this because he needed to express that.
The
He needed to
release.
express and release that emotion. And folks who are living with dementia, if they get upset during a song or if they're emotional, a lot of times that's the only way that they can express it. They may not be able to verbally tell me why this song is emotional to them, but it's very clear. And I can still, through body language, through my body language, their body language, there's still a lot of ways that you can communicate and determine, is this song something that they want to hear, or should we maybe back off of this song today? And there have been times I've used the song Danny Boy, but for someone who's in a traditional Irish family, a lot of times that's used at funerals. And so, that's
Mm.
a song. So there are songs that in my mind, I'm like, Amazing Grace is another big one, right? So there are songs like that I know, but then there are songs like All I Have to Do Is Dream. I'm not going to know that personal connection.
Mhm.
But then I'm there and I'm witnessing it and I'm observing it. And so, how can I make that a safe space and make someone be able to release what they need to release along the way? So, I always like sharing that because a lot of times you see, oh, relaxing music has to be classical, right? Or that type of a thing. And I always say it's what you enjoy. And that's no matter how old you are, like it's okay if that music isn't what works for you. I go to yoga and sometimes some of the song selections takes me out of the experience. And that's because of not only my preferences, but also what I do for a living. Sometimes I just have different connections with songs, but that's the same for any individual in any stage of life, right? And so it's something to be aware of. I always share this with folks who are having music played in their community. Obviously, share music. I'm not saying don't share music, but if somebody becomes anxious or upset, or all of a sudden, they're having a feeling that maybe seems like it's out of the blue, taking in your environment, but including what music might be on too, I think is an important thing to remember along the way when you're trying to assess, what was the onset of this feeling for that individual.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the takeaway is use music as a learning opportunity,
Yeah, yeah, very
right?
much
Like
so.
I find that so fascinating, and what a neat way to learn about your residents.
Hmm.
Honestly, it's really, really a powerful tool to have, like you said, if you're in a community and it's playing music and sort of checking in, kind of getting the pulse on what
Yeah.
are the reactions that different people are having, and that can lead to some really, really beautiful interactions.
Very much so. Yeah. And I always say, I'm very fortunate. I really get to see the best of someone with music. Music really does, bring out the best in folks, and they can connect and, share these feelings. A lot of times you'll hear someone say, mom can no longer talk, but she can still sing. Or, we go to church and she can still sing. And that's because music is throughout our brain. It's throughout our brain. And depending on if you're an active participant, so that's singing, that's playing instruments, singing in a choir, being active in a music therapy group. If you're in imaging, different parts of your brain are going to light up. If you're a passive participant, if you're more listening, if music is on in the background, other areas of the brain will be activated and will light up under that imaging. So, that's kind of a very simple way of describing the
Yeah.
science, but
I needed that.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
But our brains, when it comes to making that musical connection, our neurons keep firing till they make that connection. And going
Mm,
back to the sensory piece, their music is great because it is multisensory. And then as a music therapist, I'm including multisensory approaches while using any given song. So it's providing more opportunities to make that connection. So
yeah.
again, trying to make those connections through the areas that may be damaged along the way when you think of someone living with dementia.
That's really, really powerful. And that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Again, this cognitive connection to music, and I don't know, I just kind of started picturing like sound waves and how that can resonate and
Hmm.
really sort of make someone more alert than maybe they have been in a really long time, potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
So
much so.
I find that really, really interesting. And again, I think the biggest takeaway from our conversation is to just really use learning as or use music as a learning tool, because
Hmm.
I think it's also how you see people express themselves. Like
Yeah.
there's some research done in the Black community about expressing dance, like in music, that's
Hmm.
like, like people of color don't always want to talk, like,
Yeah.
and showing it through actions and dance and hearing music. So I just think it's so powerful, and honestly probably something that's not really being utilized enough.
Yeah, I always say there could be more of us, like more music therapists, there are a lot of us, but then we all specialize in different areas. So some music therapists work with multiple groups of people. I specialize in older adults. So it's what I've done for the last 15 years. It's my passion. It's what I kind of live for. With music therapy. So, of course there's that piece. And then you think of rural areas not having as much access. And that's the one thing I will say, about the pandemic is telehealth really became a big component of, how can we get music to folks? Now, of course, they have to have internet access and a strong connection. And, we've we've been experiencing the internet connection today and whatnot.
Yes.
And so, there's still those barriers there, but I do think technology is bringing it. Right now I'm working with a group in Maryland, and it's a group I used to work with in person.
Oh,
And,
cool.
they needed me to sub for a few groups. And so now I'm doing telehealth and I'm able to connect. It's different participants, of course, because it's many years later, but it's the same staff I worked with when I used to live there.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
it's a really cool way to reconnect with folks, via technology. And obviously telehealth looks a lot different than what an in-person group would look like, but you can still make those meaningful connections. You can still have those conversations and use music as that tool. And you were talking earlier about, expression and, not wanting to talk, but wanting to dance. And that's a huge component of music therapy. When you talk about creative expression and emotional expression, drum circles are a big one. And drumming in general with all different ages, but, with folks in memory care, again, they may no longer be able to communicate verbally or may have limited verbal skills, but they might be able to communicate rhythmically. So like, how can we play as a group? How can you feature someone and give them a solo? And then, I play, you play, there's so many different ways within drumming that you can really get somebody to communicate in their own way. And sometimes too, you hand someone a drum and all of a sudden you can tell they're upset and they're banging, with all the force. And so you're like, okay, you've got something that you need to process, that you need to get out. I had one story. I was in a group, we were passing out drums, and I think it was lots of different instruments. So it was drums mixed in with other instruments. And this nurse kept coming in to try to give medication. Again, she was unaware, she was just trying to come in, do what she needed to do and move on, and I knew the community and knew the staff pretty well because I was there weekly. So she came in, she tried, the resident refused. She came in again, tried, resident refused. And now the resident had a drum and now she has a mallet. And so now she's trying to swat the nurse away. And so after the third time, again, I tried to just put on some recorded music, get folks playing. And because again, it's just me. So, you try to keep the group going as much as you can in those moments. I pulled the nurse aside and I said, I think she's having something going on right now. She seems very much enjoying the music. Can you wait until this song's over? Or can you wait till our group's done? Or if you're going to come in, can you take her out altogether? Instead of giving it to her there in the group, I was like, can we try like one of those things and see? Mm-hmm. She was like, I'll just come back when the group is done. And she came back when the group was done. And I was able to, in the moment after she left, that resident was still worked up. She was still frustrated, having a hard time. And I was able to go over there, and musically, I was able to meet her in the moment and then bring her to kind of come back into the group, if that makes sense. Yeah. And the meeting someone in the moment is a huge part of what we do. And it's something called the ISO principle. So a lot of times you're matching someone's mood and then you're bringing them to a desired mood. So and we can do that too in our lives. If we are having a hard time, I know we're talking about the mental health benefits of a music experience. I think we've highlighted a lot of them already, but
absolutely.
When you think of, if you're struggling with anxiety or stress, you could also curate a playlist for yourself. And so you want to start with songs that are maybe a faster tempo, songs at a louder volume, faster tempo, again, preferred music, songs you enjoy. Mm-hmm. And then gradually on that playlist, bring in songs that are a little bit slower in tempo. And not even songs that are relaxing, but songs that kind of slow it down if you want to bring down your heart rate, bring down your blood pressure.
Are we getting into BPMs?
Yeah, a little bit. Oh, yes.
I had to drop that little bit of musical knowledge.
Yes.
Per minute there.
That's right. But yeah, and it doesn't even have to be specific, right? If you don't even know the BPMs, right? It's more about, because you want the desired effect to be, you want to be less anxious, you want to be less stressed. So how can you do that? And so using preferred music, using it in that way. And I always say, if music is very important to you, it's something to do ahead of time. And then when you're anxious, when you're stressed, try it, put it on and see if it works. It's another reason why when you use music for movement and exercise, and I always include some sort of exercise and light movement in my groups, no matter whether it's with folks who are independent living or all the way through. But exercise, a lot of times folks will say their endurance. You can go longer, you can run longer, you can do that cardio for longer. And that's the music is such a strong motivator, but also that rhythm and that beat. You know, all of a sudden you're running to the beat of that song,
Yeah.
or you're moving to the beat of that song. And so you know, there's a lot there, but that, you know, that ISO principle, that's a term in our work, and it's something that we do in a lot of different ways. And that was a little bit of that example with that resident and the drum in that moment. So
that's really, really cool. I love it so much there. If no one has, I highly recommend. So on Spotify, I just literally have like a morning playlist that
yeah.
I've created and go to, and it's just all these songs, because the cool thing and the powerful thing about music is it can immediately change your mood, or it can also, to backtrack, can set the tone for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And really kind of having that curated playlist can really set the tone for, honestly, the outlook of your day. And
Yeah.
other fun fact I was gonna share is I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and
Okay.
really cool music program there. And I want to say it was my sophomore year, I took an African drumming class, one of the few classes I got an A in. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That does not say anything about my drumming skills, but terrible. But it was just really cool. And to, you know, some beautiful points that you made, you know, Tara, it was like the one time a week, like I would really feel less anxious walking to a class, because everything else, like, yeah, I enjoyed it, but like there was this really high pressure, you know, to make sure I performed and really got a good grade in this class, you know. And for when I would head to this class, I would just, you know, walk the blocks, like, oh man, this is gonna be cool. I'm gonna get on the djembe and like go in. And, you know, yeah, there were exams and stuff. It's just a different feeling. And to be in the circle of obviously complete strangers, I didn't really know my
Mm-hmm.
classmates, and to just all sort of get up there. Some of us could play well, some of us embarrassed ourselves, but it, like you said, if you create a safe space, then you've got a really cool environment to have fun and
Yeah.
play and express yourself, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, and that's something else too, because singing is a big one. Obviously, I'm doing a lot of singing, encouraging a lot of singing. And when I work with care partners, caregivers, you know, a lot of times somewhere along the way, as adults, we may have been told we don't have a good singing voice, or we don't like the sound of our voice. And that's okay. I mean, I hate when I hear those stories. It's like, oh, my music teacher said this. And I'm like, but it happens, right? And it's very common. And for me, I always say in my groups, I was like, if you're having a good time, like if you're enjoying yourself, if you're here and you're present and you're in the moment, for me, that's the most important part in my work and what I do. You know, we're not here as a choir. Now, there are music therapists, and I have done this as well, who have led a choir and who have done dementia choirs and things like that. And those are very powerful. And then you are focusing a little bit more on, you know, what it sounds like. And but there, for me, it's like you said, it's more about the expression. It's more about connecting with others. It's more about being present in that moment, and just reminding folks that like it's okay. Like I always say, you know, for music therapy, you don't have to have prior music experience. You know, you don't have to be a musician, a singer, a performer, to get the benefits and to enjoy what we do. And that's also for any stage of life, going back to the playlists, right? You know, there are a lot of things we do as music therapists, but you know, there are a lot of things that any individual can do to get the benefits of music as well. So, you know, it's just something to remember. You know, obviously, if you're seeking music therapy, you're wanting those deeper connections with music. I highly recommend folks, if you are working in long-term care and senior living, you know, you're more than welcome to reach out to me.
Yes,
But you can
where
also,
can people find out more though? Because as we do come up on time here, I think, Terry, you're such a great resource. I have so enjoyed this conversation. This is so fun. So yes, please. I would love for you to offer up, you know, where people can find you and some other resources, please.
Yeah, totally. So I'm Harmony in Dementia, and you can find me, that's my website, harmonyindementia.com. I'm also at Harmony and Dementia on Facebook and Instagram. I'm getting my YouTube channel up and running, so there's not a ton of videos, but I am starting to put, right now I have like a Meet the Founder series. So it's more about me and my work and what I do. And the goal is to have lots of resources on there. So I'm adding to it every week. So there's a little bit more there each and every week. So that's kind of where you can find me in that way. But yeah, you're always more than welcome to reach out. You can email me just at contact@harmonyanddementia.com.
Awesome.
And so if you're looking for a music therapist in your area, if you're wanting to know more about music therapy, I can also help, not everyone, when it comes to folks living with dementia, telehealth is not necessarily appropriate for everyone, kind of depending on what's going on with them, but that's always an option. And that's something I'm doing a lot of in addition to my in-person work. And again, not just working with folks in Central Texas in the Austin area, but kind of throughout the country, supporting in different ways. So there's a lot of different things that I do. As far as resources, I co-authored a book called Music, Memory, and Meaning, and it's how to effectively use music with older adults. And it's mostly focused on folks living with dementia. And the book is kind of broken down into 3 sections. So we talk about music therapy, the emotional connections to music, some of what we highlighted today, really talking about, why music is beneficial for older adults. Then the second part is a bunch of playlists. So they're broken down by genre, decade, style of music, and they go through the 1970s. And so so it's me and 2 other music therapists who wrote it. And we did some research. We sent out surveys to other music therapists in the country, but it's based on the music, the songs that we found gave the strongest responses in each one of those categories. So that's the second part. And then some of those songs will have a little music note next to them. And that's because in the third part, there's over 100 engaged listening discussions. So it's taking the music further. So let's say, I know I've been using Elvis a lot. Elvis is on my brain for some reason.
There is the new movie, so that's fair.
That's true. That must be
top of mind.
But Love Me Tender, so you can put on Love Me Tender. It gives you, the year it was written. It gives you a fact or 2 about the song. And then it gives you suggestions when you're listening to the song with your loved one. How can you engage in the music? Maybe it's moving, maybe it's, swaying, we give different prompts for each song that's in this third section. And then we do discussion questions. So there's anywhere from, I think, 2 to 3, 2 to 5, it depends on the song. Always start with yes or no questions. So that's a big tip. It's mentioned in the book. But if you do have a loved one living with dementia, starting with yes or no, and then expand more broadly. And then if they're able to share more that way. But so the book was made for someone to just be with their loved one, be able to have the book in hand, and then, just access to music, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, any of those, where you can just bring up the song and then share it with someone.
Oh my goodness. That is so, so cool. I absolutely love that, because you're not just like explaining things at a high level, which you can do. And obviously you went through this program. I love that there's tangible takeaways and things that are really, really easy to execute. I absolutely love that, because I think a lot of the times, we'll share information, but not really dive deeper on how to implement that.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is, all 3 of us were very passionate about providing a resource for caregivers and care partners. They don't have a lot of time in their day. They're dealing with quite a lot, especially if you're caring for someone who's in the home, who's with you, and their time is limited. So what can we do to make it easier for them? What's something that we can do to make it easier? And that's kind of where the book, kind of went from there. And then that's something else that I do as well. I do a lot of workshops and presentations. So, if you work in senior living and want to do, a training for your staff on how to utilize music, that's something that I can curate. Again, all of my services going back to customize, it's whatever you're looking for your staff. But I also do presentations for care partners as well. So I do, I'm about to do one that's how to take the music further. And, it's going through some of what is in our book and then even expanding on that more. And so, so that's another area of my work is just, making sure that we all can use music kind of purposefully and meaningfully along the way.
Thanks for listening to Foresight Radio. You can go ahead and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. That's Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and of course, you can listen directly on our website. Thanks for listening and thanks for joining the conversation. We'll talk to you soon.